Thank you, Sarah, for leading us through a fantastic discussion and presentation about creating a relationship between photographs and audio files. What I'm going to do now is take us in a slightly different direction and have us think about what does it mean to label a photograph, and therefore think more closely about the relationship between text and the photo. Before I do so, and as part of doing so, I'm going to actually walk us through an exhibit that I created as part of a pedagogical assignment that led to the creation of a photo essay. So allow me to switch over my screen. There we go. In 2017, I was working as the coordinator of the Harriet Tubman Institute for the Research of Africa and its Diasporas, which was an ORU, or Organized Research Unit, here at York University. A few years prior, in 2013, Tubman received a donation from the Shaw family of photos, ephemera, newspapers, sketches, and film stock related to the Caribbean festival known as Caravana. These items had previously belonged to Ken Shaw, a Caravana co-founder and mass leader who passed away in 2005. Thanks to a connection that a professor at York, Christopher Innes, who is now deceased, but was also an expert in global carnival cultures, had with a member of the Shaw family, Tubman received these files. As a side note, they were actually almost lost due to a flood in the garage one day. And yes, you are allowed to gasp in shock and horror, as any proper historian would, at the possibility that they would be lost. By the time that I had begun working at Tubman, the records were open to the public, but only a few grad students had used them. And I do believe that Christopher Innes had begun to scan them, but what happened to those scans is unknown to us. In essence, the records were there, but not fully utilized. We have since moved them now safely to Scott Library for proper preservation and wider community public access. The exhibit today, Playin Mas, contains some of those records. The exhibit is the result of an experiential learning initiative led by Samantha Kuchwara of the Office of the Vice Provost Academic and Anna St. Tong of York University Libraries with the support of the Academic Innovation Fund. They invited Tubman, along with 3 other research units, to participate in a pilot project intended to provide content for a new university-wide instructor's manual on incorporating digital pedagogy in the classroom. Specifically, each research unit was expected to scan 200 images from its holdings. Over a period of 4 months, from each of these images, each of us was required to build an archive, curate an exhibit, and create several document analysis assignments. The intention being that upper-level undergraduates could complete all 3 endeavors. We could have chosen any platform to work with, but because of my training and experience, I chose Scalar. Now I'll briefly walk you through the exhibit before moving on to the specific theme of document labeling. And as I hover over the table of contents, you can see all the chapters of my book in a linear fashion. As we know, Scalar is a system or a platform that you can work not only linearly in any type of direction you want because of the tags and paths. But the first 3 chapters of this project, the first 3 chapters of the book, the first one's about the project, the second one is about a brief overview of Caravana, and the third one is a description of the Ken Shaw Fund. For time's sake, I'm going to describe and just walk through the pedagogical exercise. So here we have an archive, which is basically a discrete collection of photos organized according to a theme. In my case, I chose children in time, and this is a small sample of 25 photos that we had from 1970 to 1974. I went through all of the photos and tried to find the ones that were related to children in the batch that I had. This is not the full scope of the Shaw records. Now we're going to move to the exhibit, which is the development of a narrative or an argument related to the photos. And the first thing I ask the students to do in this section is to deal with the photos just as a person, to grapple with whatever came to mind. And they did this by asking themselves two questions. One is what I see, and what are they thinking, and the they being the person or the subject in the photograph. And then I have them write down through the annotation box in Scalar their answers. So in what I see, I see a grand stage dwarfed by tall buildings and surrounded by eager spectators. So you're really just writing kind of freestyle, getting to know, developing an intimate connection with the photograph. Then in the second annotation, then we would write an answer to what he might be thinking. Now, in this case, I wrote, let's get started. This is my time. That's what's running through their head. Equally, you could have written, or a student could have written, I need to go to the bathroom and I have all of this stuff on. How am I going to do this? Whatever the case may be, this is kind of the fun time to engage the photo and just be as creative and free thinking as possible. Then I had students put this in a carousel and ask the same questions of several photos. I really love this photo with this young woman, this young girl, because I think like her question might be, why are you taking a picture of me? Her face seems like, who are you and what do you want? But then again, what I see, and again, becoming acquainted with the photo, is I see a young girl who appears to be Indo-Caribbean walking in the parade route with a woman who might be her mother, and then go ahead and describe the dress and the tinsel in her hair. So once the students have done that as part of this assignment, which is basically a scaffolding assignment, I then ask them to now don their quote-unquote historian's hats, where they're to think about the same photos in a more structured way. And then I could prepare 10 questions for them to answer, and we will not go through all 10. But just as an example, standard, more formal, disciplinary practice of historians is to ask, what are there people in the photograph? And yes, there are. There's several people. And the second question is, what are they doing? You divide the page into the picture into 4 quadrants and describe what's in each quadrant. Oh, there's a little girl sitting next to an oil pan or a steel pan drum, people wearing a BW t-shirt. BW is an airline that doesn't exist anymore, which is really interesting, and so forth. So this is kind of the second layer of the assignment and really developing now a more structured relationship with the photo. And the third and final step of the assignment was actually the photo essay itself. So the places and spaces that children occupied during Caravana from 1970 to 74 is the photo essay. It has a standard introduction, and it talks about the 3 main ways in which the photographs led me to see children. And one of them was as competitors. And then I have an exhibit of all the photos that I found related to competition. And then I write about what I saw in each of those photos or develop an argument. And then the same photos with the young girl, we also saw them as masqueraders. So then we have a carousel of photos of young people as masqueraders. And then the third and final section in the photo essay is basically seeing children as spectators, because at this point there wasn't a separate kiddies carnival. It was everybody was playing in the large mass, which given the route, it's a lot of walking for kids, but here are different people who were watching the parade. And that is the culmination of a photo essay. So in this assignment, it was playing with photos, understanding photos, and the technical part of it was learning how to use the annotation box and at the same time be functioning as a historian. One of the most fascinating things, or my biggest learning lesson about doing that exhibit that I just walked you through, was actually switching my hat from the historian, and I say this with small quotes, to becoming the archivist, and to actually think about the dynamics of power that come with labeling a process, labeling a photo, and the process involved. Previously, an archive was a place that I entered and extracted information from. I spoke to an archivist, told them what I wanted, and received the information. And I knew, of course, that not all voices were captured. Generally, it captured the records of the elite, not the marginalized, and that even the records of the elite that were captured were questionable or not covering the full range of the human experience. However, there's a certain power, and I'd like us to do a little exercise to help you understand more of what I'm talking about, that comes with labeling a photograph. So I'm going to go switch back my screen and ask you to play along with me as we do this exercise. So here we have a photo of that came out of the Caravana collection, the Shaw collection that we had just walked through. And what I'd like you to do in the chat right now is actually label this photograph. Label it in a way that would be searchable for others on the internet to find it if you were creating an archive. And I'll take 30 seconds to just wait while you do that, and I'll be silent. Okay, and you can continue to type into the chat as I go through my experience with this photo, because I consider it my failing upward moment. This is how I labeled this document. Man in a female costume in Caravana parade. I'm sure there are some red flags about that labeling and that I came to think about after I had completed the assignment. But when I did it, I was just under a lot of pressure and I was just wanting to get this thing done, and I just labeled it quickly. We had a lot of photos, and then I stopped and I paused and I said, there's a certain amount of power I have here, and what did I and didn't I not include in this labeling? So if we think about it in terms of language, I use the term man and I use the term female or male, female. One reinforces a binary notion of gender identities. Is it correct for me to determine the gender of the person in this photo? And you will also see that I make no mention of any racial identity. If this is a quote-unquote brown person, which is often referred to those of Asian descent, or a black person as an Afro-Caribbean. The person is not marked as such. If the person isn't marked as such, I should say, how do we find them in the internet if I don't include racial labeling? Because I'm not sure, right? In the Caribbean, people are of different racial mixtures. That person could easily be what we also call a Dougla, or somebody who is part Indian and part of African ancestry. So when choosing not to label them, fine, I don't. But how does somebody who's searching for either South Asian or Afro-Caribbean people in the internet find this person who's so nicely adorned? And then let's talk about the body adornment of the costume. The leotards and the dress struck me because when I participated in Caravana, what was going on is men were wearing shorts. This would not be a costume of when I played Mass. And I won't date myself, but it wasn't when I would play Mass, they weren't wearing these costumes. So that's what struck me, and that's why I said I called it a female or woman's costume. But when I showed this photo to my hairdresser, who was also a Mass leader, she said, no, Denise, look closely. This is the female dress. This is just how the costume is. And I said, okay, very interesting. And this is a moment where it's great to bring community in early. And I was also told that this is the way that men did play mass in the 70s. There wasn't the stigma about having this particular type of masculinity. And then there's also the possibility that none of that could be true, and this is simply a man who embraced the inherent topsy-turvy nature of carnivals, of a moment of power relations turned upside down that come from not only the Lent experience, but the experience of enslavement, of when the enslaved could mock their enslavers. And so perhaps he just chose this to reverse his gender roles. I'm not sure. But these are things that I had not thought about. And had I gone to a traditional archive just to look at these photos, I wouldn't have had to have thought about it. So this is something as DH practitioners that we do need to think about, particularly when, in contrast to Sarah's experience, we are dealing with the dead and not the living whom we can verify. And that again is why it would be really nice if we, in a crowdsourcing situation, could find out who this person was, because maybe there's a living relative that could actually name, date, and locate this person in this photo. So I make all of these points, and as part of our overall discussion to think about the photographs, to challenge and to think through what does it mean to make a body searchable. If we don't make distinctions and tags, how do we find people to ensure that their histories continue? And at the same time, we want to make sure that they are being represented as accurately as possible when we do make them searchable. So I'll stop here and leave the rest of the discussion, take up the rest of the discussion in the chat. But I wanted to end on kind of 3 takeaways that I got from this entire 4-month experience of working with photographs and cultural and community photos. First of all, I would say if you are doing this type of a project, to engage the community members early and in large numbers when possible, like the key players in the community who can really help you. And 2, to remember in terms of photos that metadata is power. Labeling matters, and there's a whole literature on not necessarily the right or wrong way to do it, but best practices to think through how you narrate these type of ambiguous type of spaces where it's not cut and dry who and what you're looking at, and how to make people searchable. And the third part would also be to find other practitioners. Don't hide what you're doing. Because of my presentation of this actual exhibit, I was able to make connections with a scholar at U of T who's also interested in thinking about documents in Caribana, with the chief archivist here at York, Michael Marr, and we are also actually putting together a grant application, one of hopefully many, where we can begin to crowdsource a lot of these photos with other community organizations so that this project can live beyond its original intent. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about working in the DH world and working on a platform such as Scalar or whatever platform you choose, is that it can be much more than you imagined. So on that note, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for spending time with me and Sarah, and we both hope to chat with you more in the live session. Thank you.